Colleagues, it's really good to see you here. My name's Steve. I'm the Deputy CEO at the Confederation of School Trusts. In a moment, I'm going to be introducing you to our fantastic panel of speakers who I'm going to be conversing with today. But just before I do that, just to set the scene a little bit for you and to make sure that you're in the right place and you've clicked on the right link in your diary and this is where you're expecting to be, we are here this afternoon to have a conversation about curriculum. Curriculum in light of the curriculum and assessment review, and also obviously the government's response to that that was published recently. I can't imagine for a moment that the publication of that thing is news to you, but just in case it is, that was a series of documents, or a document, the curriculum assessment review that was published recently, which was the outcome of the big review that Professor Becky Francis and her team have led over the last year or so, looking at the curriculum in England, the national curriculum, looking at how that might need to iterate in order to meet future need. And then we've seen the government's response to that, which is effectively the government then saying, these are the recommendations we're going to move forward with, and so on. This is the work that we want to do in this space. Okay. I know from the conversations that I'm having with trust leaders up and down the land that that's really stimulated thought for you. Lots of questions about what does this mean for you? What does this mean for your organisation? Lots for you to think about and to work through. And, if, as I'm sure you are, you're a trust leader sat on this call right now thinking, yeah, what does all this mean for me? How do we work through this? That's what this webinar is about, is helping you just to think through exactly the answer to that question. And you'll have seen in the coverage of the curriculum and assessment review, lots of what I call big ticket items. So there's lots of stuff there about things like, reform of Progress 8 and so on. There's all sorts of things in there. But actually, some of the really important stuff is the detail that sits underneath that, and particularly some of the subject-specific stuff around English and maths, which we know as core subjects are really, really important to what all of you do and you provide in your schools. So what we're going to do today is we're going to park some of those big things about Progress 8 and EBAC headline measures and all those things. And actually, we're going to delve particularly into the detail around English and maths today. And to help us do that, I'm going to lean on the brilliant team at ARC. So joining us on the call, we have Will Power, who is the head of maths at ARC Curriculum Plus. Will, give us a wave. Here he is. And then we've got Michlyn Caffrey, who is head of English at ARC Curriculum Plus. Hi, Michlyn. Hiya. And then we've also got Ellen Clarke, who's head of curriculum at ARC. Really good to have the three of you on this call with us this afternoon. And the way that we're going to work this is effectively, I'm just going to pose some questions to Will, to Michlyn, and to Ellen. We're going to have a bit of a conversation around, starting from first principles really, about what all this means for us. And then later on in the session, we're going to open up with an opportunity for you to ask questions, knowing absolutely candidly from the start that this is not going to be the sort of thing where we talk for an hour and then everything's done, everything's fine, no work to do here, we put it all to bed, it's all done. This is the start of a conversation. So one of the things we're going to be asking you at the end of the session is to think about, well, what more support can we provide for you at CST? And you can begin to have a think about that now, as well as any other questions that you want to pose to our illustrious panel. So that's enough from me. I think probably what I'm going to do, if it's okay, colleagues, is get straight into the conversation. And I think I'm going to go to you first, Will, if that's okay. And just to ask you, could you give us a sense, please, with your maths hat on, what stands out to you in the curriculum and assessment review? Is there anything that we might have missed in the headlines that you particularly like to draw our attention to?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. I think number one, there's a word which comes up, which is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting in terms of addressing some of the current challenges of the curriculum, and that's resequencing. I think there's definitely a feeling that the current curriculum has too much content to be able to teach it properly and to depth. And obviously, our program Maths Mastery is all about teaching to depth and supporting colleagues to really understand how to get under the bonnet of teaching maths well. So that resequencing idea, I think, is really important because it's about moving topics around to create space where it's absolutely needed, and really welcome the emphasis on Key Stage 1 in particular, and that idea of foundational knowledge. So the resequencing to ensure that those core foundational skills are taught well is really, really important without losing breadth. And I think it's really important to note that there's not actually a huge amount that's going to be lost. So this idea of quote unquote, dumbing down the curriculum, the same amount of stuff will be there probably, give or take. It will just be resequenced and greater emphasis will be placed on that foundational piece. There's also going to be much more coherence. So kind of characterizing different key stages in maths, for example, key stage 1 being really the focus for additive reasoning, key stage 2 being the focus of multiplicative reasoning, and then key stage 3 proportional reasoning. And I think that kind of clarity of focus in each key stage aligned to that resequencing will really support schools to know what should be taught when and see the links between them. And the other reason why I think resequencing is a kind of key buzzword is it's about reducing repetition. And we know that there's a lot of things that are taught from first principles more than once throughout the experience of a pupil in their school journey. And that actually just is inefficient. So if we can get the resequencing right and teach the core skills really, really well, we won't need to have to, for example, reteach fractions from core principles in secondary school. I think that's a brilliant aspiration, but there's a lot of work to do to actually make secondary colleagues confident that their pupils are genuinely coming up with those foundational skills. But I think that's absolutely the focus for the next phase of the curriculum. A point about that resequencing and that creation of space, which I think is really important for members, is actually, okay, if we're creating space, you've got to be really clear about what you're going to fill that space with. And teaching for depth and teaching for mastery is not a given for a lot of primary school colleagues. So we really need to think about how we support teachers to understand what teaching for depth looks like, so that they aren't just relying on that curriculum conveyor belt, which can mask a lot of poor subject knowledge, for example. So there's challenges there, but definitely that emphasis is really important. And I would say the second kind of thing that stands out for me for maths is the emphasis on problem solving, which kind of instinctively is the thing that actually lots of people say, well, maths is about being able to solve problems. But really primary teachers particularly, but in secondary too, they really struggle to be able to know how to explicitly teach problem solving well. And the emphasis on problem solving is great, and it stimulated a lot of, okay, what do we do about that? Really pleased to be part of the Horizons Maths project, which is specifically focusing on problem solving. That's kicked off in the last few days, and that will really focus on providing resources alongside the development of the new curriculum, alongside the programs that we already run that do problem solving well, like the Maths Mastery program, but actually providing resources. And I'm hopeful that there will be some free to use things that members can access, like progression documents for problem solving, worked examples, to really try and plug that gap of addressing the need and supporting teachers to teach problem solving well. But I would say my last thing is probably the assessment piece, and actually making sure that in line with those improvements, the assessment at Key Stage 2 and obviously at GCSE reflects the different emphasis, so that we see those core skills being assessed, we see problem solving being assessed. Currently at Key Stage 2, for example, you can basically pass your SAT without doing very much problem solving. So we need to address that. So I would say those are my key top 3 things for primary maths and for secondary maths.
Lovely. Thanks, Will. Thanks so much. And this is why it's so good to have you guys from ARC on the call. There's all sorts of stuff there already. I'm scribbling notes down, learning lots in terms of the interest that there is, I think, probably in what you've spotted as a subject expert there. That resequencing, I thought, really, really important, because I think there is probably a conversation out there that suggests that actually what we're going to see is loads of stuff thrown out, and actually what I'm hearing from you is an expectation that's probably not how this is going to work. But resequencing, I think, is a really helpful concept to grab onto. Michlyn, can I come to you next with the same question, just with your English hat on, just to give us a
of course.
What's really stood out to you?
Yeah, I think building on what Will said there about the resequencing, I think that's also important and true for English, because I think what English teachers are worried about are, oh my goodness, the curriculum's already crammed. Like, what else can we fit in? Because it doesn't look like from GCSE level that there's going to be much taken out in terms of the canon. But actually, it is also, I'd say to secondary leaders, consider what's happening in the stage before, because actually at Key Stage 2, it might be that some of that resequencing might then be resequenced into Year 7. So really consider, and start thinking about, when those changes are made, like what's that going to look like? I think I think it's right that there is a heavy focus on inclusion and the disadvantaged lens that what we provide, that they want to focus on giving high quality entitlement for all pupils. And that really does link in with what we were talking about earlier about that foundational knowledge. So I think it is also thinking about, in English, likewise, there's lots of text to cover. And so it's making sure that your teachers are really secure in their subject knowledge for English, and supporting that with the upcoming CPD, because it's likely that there's going to be more focus on, what those foundational core knowledge is going to be, and what that looks like from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. So I think we should really be thinking about that transition phase. Lots of people probably might be worried about the changes to the Key Stage 2 assessment, because there's going to be introduction of a new grammar assessment. And we're not sure what that's going to look like yet. But, we do have already, the DfE has released the writing framework, which is really, really useful. Even the new Ofsted framework is really useful. And us, we are an English Mastery Primary and English Mastery Secondary, have created actually sentence mastery level framework that focuses on the DfE writing framework that's been released. So we're already thinking about what's that sequence look like in writing from Key Stage 2, and what's that going to look like in Key Stage 3 as well. So again, like a real emphasis, I think, on that sequencing, and also getting your subject leaders to really understand what does good curriculum sequencing look like. I think it's leaders that's where you can really support your team, creating that space for them to really think about having some opportunity to also audit what their current curriculum looks like. It might be that you're already doing amazing things, and so it's not throwing that out completely. It's thinking about what is working really well, why is it working well, and then when the new programs of study are released, and once we got that new curriculum, it's then you've already got those strong foundations. It's now just thinking about how can we sort of fine tune that. So very similar, I think, landscape in terms of English. It's about, I think, being a really clear in terms of that core knowledge is what I'd really highlight.
Lovely, thanks so much, Michlyn. So Ellen, can I come to you next? So we've had a really good sort of sense here from Will and from Michlyn, two subject experts steeped in this stuff. I'm aware that on the call we're going to have an audience of trust leaders who may happen to be experts in maths or English, but also may not do. There's a world of wonderful, other subjects, but also we'll have colleagues on the call potentially who are leading trust who perhaps haven't actually taught themselves. We know there are some people that have come through sort of the business route within organisations and so on. Could you just give us a sense of, in what feels like a period of quite significant reform, obviously CAR, but also across a whole range of other areas as well, how does leaders sort of break this down strategically? What's the task ahead of us? Could you just give us a sense of sort of how we might go about tackling this stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I think you are right. There's an awful lot going on at the moment. When you couple the kind of the Ofsted changes and the post-16 white paper and the wait for the kind of perpetual wait for SEND reform. Actually, I think as much as the intention of CAR was that it would be evolution, not revolution, it does start to feel slightly like revolution when there are these many things to factor in. And I think that there's a lot about all of those changes that feel quite coherent. But I think there are going to be things we need to grapple with. The one thing I do want to stress here, because as a trust, I would say we are not moving particularly fast on this, deliberately so. And that's because actually, if you really think about the timeframes, we are expecting perhaps draft consultative versions of curriculum kind of later into 2026, I suspect. I know they are saying spring, we'll see. And then actually we are talking about, say, the publication of that National Curriculum and Programmes as Study for spring 2027, first teaching 2028, and then actually a first cohort finally sitting reformed GCSEs in 2031 at the first instance. So we do have some time and space. And I think what's really important is that the crucial detail will come with the publication of those programmes of study and the reformed national curriculum. And I think there is a danger that we we move too much and particularly assume too much from the consultation process. Like just recalling yesterday when I was preparing for this, I remember watching Becky Francis at a select committee at one stage and becoming absolutely convinced that they might get rid of primary languages based on not a lot of what she'd said, really. And so I think just being really cognizant that actually you can use some of that consultative element to start to frame your thinking, but we shouldn't be running with anything. The reality is that we've got, pupils who are going to be experiencing our current curriculum in our schools right now for many years, and they're probably the people we need to concentrate on. I would say to trust, like, keep improving quality of current offer. Don't lose sight of any of your current priorities, which you feel are well aligned with overall direction of travel. We are really trying to do some very intentional work, as Michlyn mentioned, on her writing in the primary phase, particularly our early writing. That feels like it's going to stand us in good stead, irrespective of what those changes might be. And more importantly, it's going to stand our pupils in good stead, irrespective of what those changes might be. So that feels quite important. The other thing that I'm kind of really keen to stress, I suppose, is that actually one of the things we have been trying to do over the last few years is to play an increasing game of curriculum buckaroo, if you like. That donkey that you used to play with as a kid just gets more and more laden. And I really don't want schools to be in a position, and particularly our schools to be in a position, where they feel they need to start including elements like, say, climate education or financial education or large swathes of oracy practice. When we don't know exactly what that will look like, and we can't yet say what confidently we can take out of the curriculum. And I think we run the risk of being very, very overladen in the short term if we don't think about this as quite a gradual progression, I suppose.
And that's an incredibly powerful set of reflections. So just to recap, then, I think what I've heard from you is that we're expecting drafts not before. Did you say sort of Easter 26? Is that right?
Yeah, and I think there's some anticipation that they might come slightly later, but certainly,
Right.
yeah, I think drafts sort of spring 26 is the
And
suggestion.
then the final thing published then, so we know what the final thing is going to look like, then spring 27, but then first teaching not until September 28. Is that right? Just want to double check.
Yeah, my understanding anyway.
Yeah,
Please
fabulous.
nod, panel, if I'm correct. That's what I
Yeah,
think.
Will's putting thumb up. Michelyn's nodding. That's good. So I just think that's so important, because that underpins then, I think, the key message you've shared with us then, which is actually this is not about us running out this week and sort of sprinting and trying to do loads. And actually, I think you're pinpointing a few risks here for us if we were to respond in that way. One obviously, we know the workload of colleagues is really important to everyone on the call, but also a real risk that we overburden the curriculum, because presumably the extra bits that we are going to have to do, you mentioned, for example, like oracy there, you talked about financial literacy and so on. So where we do have sort of extra bits coming in, the expectation is that, this was coming back to Will's point, is we'll be able to do that because other parts of the six curriculum will be resequenced and so on, such as to make sure that we've got the room in the curriculum to do that. That's the theory, right? And until that work has happened, the risk is we'll just chuck more on top of this thing, and we might see a real sacrifice in terms of quality. I think that's the argument you're making, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Really, really powerful. So okay, so that's helpful. So we don't want to rush out and do loads of stuff and risk getting it wrong or being sort of counterintuitively unhelpful in the curriculum. But also, are you also saying that we shouldn't do anything ahead of? So give us a sense. I know you're not, but give us a sense then of, for trust leaders on the call, what do you think is the helpful stuff that they could be doing between now and that date in 26, that date in 27? I'm thinking about particularly things like resourcing, training, all that sort of stuff. What might we be doing?
Yeah, so I think I've been kind of pondering this. I think there's a fascinating dynamic to this work, because I think there's a kind of an element of needing to work quite slowly and quite intentionally in the early stages so that you can move pretty briskly once you have those finalized programs. And so I've been kind of starting to ponder ideas around sort of staffing and recruitment and training and the ways that we might be able to support. I'm also keenly aware, we as ARC are aware of this, like that we have to think really carefully about what our capacity and our capability is organisationally in a climate where lots of trusts are having to think about being leaner in terms of central capacity, and working really smartly in that regard. And so I think one of the things I'm kind of interested in getting right is thinking about both our potential hiring practices and advice schools on that, and then the training of existing teams. Hiring wise, I think it would be really sensible for schools to start thinking about asking questions around curriculum design experience, change management experience within their hiring practices, and just making sure that they're confident that anyone that they're hiring is going to be well skilled in doing that. And particularly I say change management because actually this is probably going to be about iterating current curriculum, refining, reshaping potentially in many subject areas rather than wholesale and very significant changes. And then I think really thinking about training of existing teams. So I'm planning to create perhaps some advice and guidance to our schools on how they might go about using the time available to them and allocations to things like inset, or we have weekly co-planning time to think about the scope and the nature of this work. Both where they've got to redesign their own curriculum and where they might need to really get to grips with common curriculum and the implications of changes there. And then I think also just building a really shared understanding and confidence, particularly at our senior leader level, I suppose, where we will have more jurisdiction as a trust, but also a middle leader level around questions of kind of curriculum design and sequencing. We're aware, I suppose, that the nature of recruitment and churn in education means that actually we might be in a position where a number of people in schools and in leadership positions did not go through those kind of go-era changes to curriculum. I'm going to use the phrase back in the day, like some kind of old timer, but I remember it the first time round. And so also I think being really confident that people feel skilled in those areas, and then thinking about, areas like oracy practice, where we know there's this amazing body of kind of research and evidence and considered thought there. And can we expose our schools to that, get them thinking and kind of percolating those ideas about what great oracy looks like, for example, before we then kind of rush to make changes. We've got the time and space perhaps to frame that work really well. So then they get to when they have the new program to study and feel really confident about implementation. They're kind of my thoughts.
Really incredibly helpful. So what I think, again, I'm hearing that it's not the sprint to do loads of work now, right? We've got some time, and there's risk for us if we put our energies into the wrong stuff. But actually, the right stuff might be, and this is why I think this is a really important message for the audience on the call that we've got here today, is to think about what's the capacity building piece look like between now and then, so that. And I love that thing you talked about. Of actually, it's not about rushing now, but it's about being in a position where actually we can turn around this work quite quickly. And effectively as and when it's done. And great, I can see colleagues starting to put comments in the chat. That's really good. Please do post your comments and your questions in there, because in a little while we'll be moving into the Q&A part of the session. So please share your thoughts. Ellen, really helpful. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come back to Will and Michlyn here for and I'm gonna come to you first, Michlyn, on this one. So Ellen's talked us through this sense that it's not about sprinting, it's about being considerate, it's about building capacity. She mentioned the phrase that we've heard I think throughout this period of the curriculum assessment review, which was evolution, not revolution. And to my mind, that's not about, or at least I haven't interpreted that as being a message about lacking ambition, but it's one about trying to build on what we think is working, and not throwing out babies with bathwater and so on. And what I wanted to do is just to come to you with your expertise that you have in your subject area. And could you just give us a sense of actually, what are you going to be leaning into over the coming sort of months and years? What's the stuff that you're already doing perhaps that's really working for you in relation to English? Because there may be colleagues on the call that perhaps are cited on this work, and there may be others who aren't. I thought they'd value that. And then I'll come to you, same question, Will, afterwards, if that's all right from that. Michlyn, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's probably useful for me to sort of set the context really that ARCA, we're very lucky that we have the team to focus on curriculum. Our curriculum is also not just used by art schools, we're also used by lots of other multi-academy trusts. And so in some ways we do have to be a little bit more ahead, because we know that other trusts are relying on us to support them with curriculum. So I just wanted to forefront that, because I don't want everyone on this call to think, oh my goodness, we have to do exactly the same thing. So that's not the case at all. But yeah, I'll talk through some of the work that we're already doing in art schools and obviously just within our curriculum itself. So I think you're right, Steve. I think it is about the evolution part, and part of that work is therefore being really clear and perhaps doing an audit of what your curriculum already is, and having a really thorough, or having the time and space to go through your curriculum and, like I said, do an audit. What's working really well, instead of just buying into programs and adding a whole summer unit of oracy. We're asking you to think about, is oracy already part of your pedagogy within lessons within English? Is that already working well? What work have you already done within oracy? Likewise with there's that addition of more diverse text to show a modern Britain. That doesn't mean throw out all of your older canon texts. That's not the case at all. It's thinking again about, what texts are working really well. Where in the curriculum perhaps can that space be made? Could that be built in your reading for pleasure strand, for example? So having a real kind of clever, rather than saying, doing everything all over again, what's working really well and how can those, highlighting where are those areas that perhaps you do need to invest in. And that's where you can perhaps determine, okay, perhaps we need to invest in subject specific CPD for that area, or perhaps we want that our head of subject, a head of English to be go on a course and understand what is out there in terms of diverse texts, and that's going to engage pupils but also reflect who they are in a modern diverse Britain. So I think that's part of the work. I think it's also using what's already there, what is already available in the sector. There's lots of useful webinars like this one happening at the moment. I know lots of exam boards like AQA, Pearson, etc. are running lots of forums as well, again, that your subject specialists or your subject leads can attend, so they can be at least part of the conversation. And also it's that resource sharing, like what is happening, like what we're doing today, what are other trusts doing. So I think be involved in that conversation where you can. Look at the Ofsted framework that is already out, because that does talk a lot about the foundational knowledge that we know that is probably going to feed into a lot of the sequencing. Within English, we've done a lot of work on our 4-year strategy in terms of writing. So that's building foundations from, Ellen mentioned earlier about the early years writing. And so we're thinking about what does that look like in early years? How does that transition into Key Stage 3? What does that look like in Year 7? And it's kind of focusing on, can students orally say what a sentence is first before then writing sentences? So it's going back to that foundational knowledge. So I think it's, like I said, it's all about auditing what you already have, looking at what's out there, being part of the conversation, and just wherever you've got kind of these webinars coming up, like sign up to them, because I think you'll get useful information regardless.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Michlyn. And when you were talking, you reminded me of something that I meant to say to colleagues, which is your point about looking outside. Really, really important, isn't it? Those connections that we have, those networks we have. Little plug here. This whole piece of work is going to be really interesting, I think, to CST's school improvement community. So if, as the sort of months and years roll by for this is obviously long-term work that we're talking about here, please, colleagues, do be sharing exactly as Michlyn just talked about, the work that you're doing. We've got a really good sense, haven't we, in the system, I think, of many hands make light work, right? So if we can pool our collective resource, that's a good forum to do.
And I'll probably just add, Steve, that if we're looking ahead, Ellen mentioned there about potentially the first year groups that might be affected by this. I think also have that in mind. So we think roughly it's probably going to be the year 5s and 6s who will start the new GCSE, and I think it's probably potentially the current year 3s that will be experiencing the new SAT. So although we know that change is coming, we've also got to consider what support are we going to have for those year groups that perhaps wouldn't have. So year 3s, for example, if they're going to be sitting SATs, they might not have therefore had year 1 and year 2 support. So it's that transition support as well. So not just thinking about the content, but also supporting your current cohorts moving through, because you are going to have some of those year groups that will have a little bit of mislearning, or it'll be a slightly different curriculum from when they started their first experience to obviously that last year where they are going to be experiencing that new curriculum for the first time and those exams for the first time.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Thank you ever so much for that. Will, I'm going to go to you with the same question. Just give us a sense of what's working where you are, the things that you're going to look at and build and sort of lean into over the course of the next few months and years.
Yeah, and just picking up on what Michlyn said just then about the dreaded SATs word, I was lucky enough to kind of stress test some of my hypotheses about SATs with somebody from the STA yesterday, with that very question, which I'm sure is a question that your members will be thinking, okay, what, particularly those affected year groups, year twos, year threes, what will SATs look like for them when they might be in that first year of a new curriculum? And I was really reassured because all of the things, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, that foundational knowledge phrase she was using, and she was saying, look, maths hasn't suddenly changed. The foundational knowledge that you have in maths has not suddenly, it won't change because we've got a new curriculum, and they will be focusing on the things that are the foundational knowledge in the current curriculum, which will probably be similar to what the foundational knowledge focus will be in the new curriculum. So I found that incredibly reassuring, and it really validated the work that we're doing. And Michlyn mentioned the ARC schools, but also the many schools that use our program as well. And I would, again, agree that just taking a step back and going, okay, what are we doing right now in terms of those big theme areas? And what does our foundational offer look like in our schools? From a maths perspective, I would definitely say Key Stage 1 could be where you focus your attention initially and say, okay, how confident are our kids in year 1 at their foundational knowledge, their number bonds? Are they automatic and fluent in single-digit addition and subtraction? If you get into year 3 or 4, and I guarantee if your members talk to their teachers or talk to their leaders in schools, they will say, what does it look like when you ask a single digit calculation in year 3 and 4? And if people are saying that children are using their fingers, okay, you've got an issue with foundational skills at Key Stage 1. So there are some really quick, simple things you can do, just walking through the schools that are in your trust and getting a sense of the strength of those foundational skills. Obviously, early years is crucial. So seeing year 1 and Key Stage 1 in the context of early years, how well does your offer support spatial reasoning skills, core concepts like counting, number recognition, subitizing, composing, decomposing? What does your offer look like in those core areas? For Key Stage 2, multiplication, core skills like knowing your times tables, how strong is the offer there? I think crucially, do the teachers in your schools know what the non-negotiable foundational pieces of knowledge are? Because it's got to start with the teachers knowing what the kids should know. And that's that's a straightforward thing that leaders can do. They can do an audit of the subject knowledge of their teachers. We define those non-negotiables really clearly in the Maths Mastery program, and obviously that then supports our schools to know what their teachers should know, and then they can therefore be really informed when they do their auditing. And that can then lead to, okay, what are the CPD needs for those teachers? And I think it's about leaders connecting all of those things together. Do we know what the foundational skills are? How well are they being taught right now? If there are some areas where we need to have a bit more support and thought, what are the CPD offers that we're turning to and looking to support that? And again, echo Michlyn, what she said, look outwards, look at what other schools in your trust are doing in supporting that subject knowledge piece. I would say, just as an aside, all primary school teachers by definition are non-specialists, but in maths in particular, we see teachers going into being a primary school teacher not having a strong subject knowledge in maths. And I think really focusing in on the foundational skills and supporting the CPD and subject knowledge for primary maths teachers in that area is a great investment for whatever happens in the new curriculum, because it will undoubtedly focus on those core things. And my last point, really, in terms of what we're actually doing, I mentioned the Maths Horizons project. That is hopefully going to do a lot of work for the sector. We will hopefully be producing some really good template examples of problem-solving types, which you can directly, quickly share with your teams, and they can get to know the types of problem-solving questions that might come up in a future SATs paper, for example. So there is going to be support out there, and I think it's about looking for where that is, looking to where trusts are kind of ahead of the game a little bit. And like Michlyn said, we have to be a little bit further ahead because of the schools that we support. So please look to the colleagues in the sector that are doing the things that need to be done.
Lovely, thanks, Will. And I really like that that framing around sort of the investment. So where's the right place to invest? And again, that's that strategic leadership, isn't it? That people on the call will be thinking about. What's the work that we can do, and what's the right investment to make of time. Really, really good. So what we're going to do now, colleagues, is we're going to sort of pivot into sort of the next part of the conversation, where we're going to start to explore some of your questions. And hopefully you shared some of these questions with us in advance. So I've got a couple just to warm us up, but then I've also seen that people are starting to put questions in the chat as well. So that's absolutely right. Thank you very much for that. And we're just going to get through as many of these questions as we can in the time we have. But please do keep pumping these questions into the chat as we go. And anything that we can't answer, we'll do our best to try and get responses together for you, and to sort of give you the answers as best as we know them, of course, as soon as we can. Okay, but what I wanted to do, there was a question, and Will, I think you might have covered this one off already, but I'm going to see whether you want to come back to it. I'm thinking back to what you said in your opening remarks, but one of the questions we had before the session was, how do you envisage the new additions will impact on an already crammed curriculum? And I know you talked, or didn't you, about, I think what you're saying is that actually this resequencing you think will address some of that. But I just want to invite you, is there anything else you want to say about that notion of the crammed curriculum and how this might play out?
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognise that there's the overall curriculum, so Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, and the content that will be moved around, but that overall we're not expecting lots of additional new topics to be introduced. However, if you're in a year group and something has been resequenced into your year group, that will obviously feel like an addition for you. So I think it will feel different for different year groups. I mentioned Key Stage 1 because the focus on foundational skills will naturally fall to those early year groups. There will be things probably moved out of that key stage to make room for more time to teach those foundational skills. So those core number facts, for example. There's some speculation that, for example, that fractions might move into Key Stage 2, that first teaching of fractions. There's specific mention of kind of more complex calculations with fractions moving to Key Stage 3. There's some mention of potentially algebra moving to Key Stage 3. So the overall piece might not feel like things are being added, but if you're a teacher that is having things introduced to your year group that you might not be used to, that's obviously going to feel like an addition. So I think it's about supporting your teachers and giving them time and space to be able to develop the year group specific content knowledge so that they're able to adapt to those changes. Obviously, I've mentioned problem solving a few times. That's, I think, one of the key themes for the whole of the curriculum review. So thinking really carefully about how do we teach problem solving in our schools? What explicit support is there for teachers to develop their pedagogy in teaching problem solving? So it's not just about specific topics being moved around or being added or taken away, because I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of change there. It's also the emphasis on certain things like problem solving, and then seeing how that gets surfaced in assessments. Is there a greater emphasis on the marks available for problem solving at Key Stage 2 SATs, for example, and just keeping on top of knowing what those changes are. And again, it comes back to capacity in your team to provide the subject-specific, topic-specific CPD that your teachers need.
Lovely. Thanks, Will. Thanks so much. Michlyn, I'm going to come back to you for the next question. So this was another that was shared with us before the session, which I thought was a really interesting question. And I'm not sure how easy it will be to answer because, of course, we don't know what everything's going to look like yet. But the question was, how will a smoother transition be created between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3? Is there anything you could say on that, do you think?
Yeah, I think we've been lucky that we have some schools, not just within art, but some of the other schools that we support that are all through schools. And actually we can learn quite a lot from those schools. So I think having an understanding of what does English look like at Key Stage 2 and what does it look like at Key Stage 3? What are the main differences, I think, is really important. I think probably one of the positive things that's come out is that the potentially the grammar content will be heavily reduced. And I think a lot of teachers are really pleased about that, especially that learning grammar by rote and just memorizing all those definitions, which is great. I think that's good. That's being reduced. However, there is now that kind of shift of focus into, perhaps there's going to be less, but do teachers know what that looks like practically in writing? Because I think that's what the focus of the new grammar test is going to look like. And if some of those sequencing is going to move to Key Stage 3, do Year 7 teachers have a really strong understanding of grammar? Because, even when I started teaching, I was not language trained. And so there's, a lot of English teachers tend to be literature trained. So do they have an understanding of writing and grammar? What does that look like in Key Stage 2? Knowing what's come in the stage before so that you can really close those gaps at Key Stage 3, but also be ready, almost also having that shared language. There's lots of terms sometimes that are used at primary with writing, etc., that perhaps Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4 teachers don't use. And so it's talking to those teachers. Even if you're not part of even if you're not all through school, I think look at your feeder schools for your secondary schools. Can you arrange some visits to have a look at what their work looks like now, just to give you an idea of, what it is they're doing in English that's different that they're doing Key Stage 3. Because we've learned a lot from doing that in the past. Even also just looking at the texts that they're reading, it might be some texts that we often there's kind of that classic, let's see what text we have in the English cupboard to kind of save money. But it might be that they're already learning some of those texts at Key Stage 2, Year 5, Year 6. So I think it's just good to get an awareness and having those chats with colleagues in primary, if you're in secondary and vice versa, just to see what's happening there. So I think start having those conversations. Like I said, look outwards. You can also use resources that are already out there. Like I said, we've done quite a lot of work already in terms of trying to have that transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 with writing. So definitely having a look at some of those documents will be helpful just to get that knowledge secure.
Really, really good. Thanks, Michlyn. Much appreciated. Okay, I'm going to come to you next, Ellen. So there's one of the questions that was posed in the chat. One of the first questions I thought was really interesting. So, and I'm not going to make you hostage to fortune, so I'm not going to come back and quote this to you in the future. But the question was: are we talking about a new curriculum or a renewed curriculum? How much change is there going to be?
Oh, I saw this question. I thought it's a great question.
Yes.
It is going to vary, I think, across subject areas. I think colleagues, for example, in computing are probably going to really feel this as quite a different curricular experience potentially. Others, I think it's going to be about the word I wrote down when I clocked the question was the word finessed. That's what I'm hoping for ardently, is that it feels like a kind of finessed curriculum. I was quite encouraged, I suppose, when I saw some of the language in the review where they were, I suppose, very much kind of echoing some of the things that we would have said were as important previously in curriculum around knowledge richness. And I think that those 6 principles that they kind of outlined as the sort of basic premise for what a curriculum should look like feel really sensible. And so I think if what it manages to achieve is sort of following the thread of all of those things, which have been relatively successful in schools up to this point, but really reiterating and kind of finessing that idea of actually, can we distill this down slightly? We really do want a reduction of time at GCSE. What does that actively look like? And so, yeah, I think being cognizant that this will feel different for colleagues across different phases and different subject areas, and that some will feel like there is a great deal more to do, perhaps, in terms of this change, and thinking intentionally as schools and trusts about how we kind of manage that for what will feel a very varied sense of workload for people. But yeah, I suppose I think finessed is what I'm hoping for, with some variation across different areas.
No, thank you. It's a really good point. And that point about it's going to vary across subjects, I think we instinctively know that will probably be the case, right? I guess the challenge for colleagues on the call is how do you manage that? What does that look like when you've got different needs across the organisation, varying I suppose, strengths and that you might have, various areas for development. You might already have, aside from all the changes that are going to be coming down the line. And that strategic thing is something that leaders are going to have to think about really, really carefully. And I'm hopeful that we're going to see more in this space soon, in this sort of this strategic leadership sort of space. Am I breaking confidence if I ask you to say a little bit more about what else might be coming down the line to help leaders? I think
Oh.
I think there's a paper in the works. Is that right, or some such that we might be
Oh,
working on?
so sorry. Yeah. So I was going to mention this, but I was going to mention it towards the end. Sorry. It's not a paper particularly, but I suppose
Okay.
one of the things that I just want to give some credit to Nimish Ladd at Creative Education Trust and Lauren Meadows at Unity have been amazing in kind of trying to draw together some heads of curriculum and other curriculum and assessment figures across trusts to think quite intentionally about some advice and guidance, or maybe not advice and guidance is too strong, but a bit of a think piece about what are we envisaging we might do in terms of managing this change and responding to recommendations across our trusts, and then also to think kind of collectively about the kinds of changes that we might be making and how we can really work together as a sector to kind of foster some collaboration, because there is a danger that we all go off into our silos and wrestle with this and worry about it greatly, and just being able to share what we're doing, I think would be really powerful. I'm hoping that's what you meant, Steve.
That is exactly what I meant, and I'm sorry if I
Great.
made you say that. If you're going to bring that in the end,
No, no,
I
no,
just
no. It's absolutely
sounds
fine. I wanted to give them their flowers because they've been great on it, and really kind of pulled the rest of us into shape to get something done. So no, they've been fab.
I think just that it sounds to me like a really important piece of work, because again, I don't think we can sort of overstate just the strategic management of this across trust as complex organisations is going to be a challenge in itself, right? As well as the subject level content changes that Will and Michlyn so eloquently sort of talking us through at the moment. So that I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. So thank you for talking about it, and one for colleagues just to keep an eye on. There, I suppose, linked to this issue of like the strategic challenge, and I don't know whether this is a question for Will, Michlyn, and Ellen. Any of you feel free to come in, but there was a view expressed in the chat that said actually there's not a lot of time. By the time we see those final programs of study in sort of Easter 2027 and then first teaching in 2028, we've got 4 terms to potentially do quite a lot of work. Is there almost an advantage to someone like taking a risk almost and starting your planning based on the draft programs that are going to come out a year before? And again, I don't want to make you a hostage to fortune, but these are all the questions that people are grappling with. And I just wondered if you've got a view. Will, you've come off mute, I think. Does that mean you want to come into the fray and answer that question?
Well noticed. I think I think you were right to characterize the challenge of leadership here is about where do you it's about decision making, about resource allocation. How do you focus your time in the right places? I do think in maths that the directions of travel, and I've talked a lot about foundational skills, etc. Like there are quite safe bets in terms of the pieces of knowledge that kids just have to have. And I think the sector over the last sort of 18 months, as Cara has been kind of talked about and put together, has reached quite a lot of consensus about the need for automaticity and number facts at Key Stage 1, for example, the need to have problem solving as a more prominent part of the curriculum as a whole, but then assessed a bit more explicitly at Key Stage 2 SAT. So I feel like there's not going to be things that if you kind of are tuned into some of that conversation, you're not going to be taking too many risks if you go, okay, let's invest a bit more time in problem solving, for example, or let's look at resources that unpick problem solving in a more explicit way for my teachers because they need that. Like that is not going to be a risk-taking decision, I don't think. I think if you're getting really granular and you're going like, should I be teaching Roman numerals, which is the big thing that everyone has said is going to be removed. Like, I think that's kind of missing the point a little bit. I think it's about looking at those thematic things that are coming through, emphasis on foundational skills, and really getting your teams to be confident in what those are and having a plan for supporting them, and not worrying too much about the specifics of what the curriculum will be written as, because there will be people in the sector doing a lot of that work already, and it's about being tuned into that. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's my feeling.
I thought it did beautifully. Thank you, Will. I thought it was really, really important message. Again, coming back to that sort of building capacity piece, that sense that this isn't a binary choice between we sit on our hands for a couple of years and do nothing, or we rush to it now. Actually, we do what good leaders do. We make good strategic choices about how we build capacity, what that investment looks like over time. Because frankly, in the world where there wasn't even a curriculum and assessment review, we'd be doing some of this stuff anyway, right? We'd still be trying to work out what's the best way of teaching maths, what's the best way of teaching English, and so on. And do we have the right resources, the right expertise in the organisation to help us do that? I think that's what I'm hearing. Michlyn, do you want to add to
Yeah, I
that?
was just going to add to that, for secondary English, it's thinking about the subject discipline of English, like what does it mean to be a student of literature? And so we're probably already making those right decisions anyway, in terms of the big themes that students will be studying just in general literature. There's not that many themes really, like you can probably count them on your fingers, like how many big themes there are. We know there's not going to be much change. We know there's still going to be a Shakespeare text, 19th century, etc. So again, you're probably, that's already in the curriculum at the moment. So it's just thinking really closely about, well, what are the big themes that are in those types of texts? Because that's what it means to be a student of literature, right? Like, what does it mean to be, to study those big things like love, freedom, power, etc. But how do we build the core knowledge in understanding those themes? So I think it's again, you don't necessarily need the specifics of the program of study. I think I would personally stay away from things that are really unknown, like the Year 8 reading test. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. The grammar test, we don't know what that is going to look like yet. So I think it's the things that you do know, do them really well. You're probably already doing them well anyway, but just thinking about doing that audit, how can you do it better? And then because you've already done that foundational work, by the time it is, it's time to move on to those new programs of study, you're not having to worry about everything all at once. So I think that message of moving slowly but intentionally is really important.
Lovely. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so we've got just a few minutes. There's a couple of questions that we've got left that I want to try and tackle. So, and I'm going to come to you on one of them. Now I'm going to do something a little bit unusual, which is I'm going to invite everyone else to answer the next question because I think it probably is as relevant to everyone on the call. So the one I'm going to come to you with, Ellen, is one that's been posted about how hopeful are you that the proposed changes will improve the status and quality of arts and DT. Obviously, there's quite a lot in the narrative behind the curriculum assessment review and about the trying to address what is felt to many, I think, in the system like the sort of the arts falling away a little bit. So I'm going to come to you on that. But before I do that, or whilst you're thinking about what your answer will be, colleagues, there was another question in the chat which says this: what are some good approaches to galvanise schools within a trust to come together and collaborate on curriculum? So writing common curriculum, etc., rather than individual people and schools duplicating. Can I just invite you, while Ellen's answering that question I just posed to her, maybe you could put some answers in the chat to us. Maybe you could share your views, because my guess is that we've got 100 or nearly 150 people on the call here. There's going to be lots of expertise in the room around how do you galvanise people around that. But if you also want to talk to that as well, and then please feel free to add that in. But primarily, I was going to come to you on the arts and DT. And once we've done that, we're going to round the conversation up with one more, or in fact, two more quick things. But over to you, arts and DT.
Do you know, I spoke to or was asking our marvelous sort of head of enrichment and creative arts, Margaret O'Shea from our trust, about this yesterday, because I think one of the things that we have been most pleased with at ARC actually is the increased prominence of arts education within the new curriculum recommendations. I think that we're really quite pleased actually, because we don't believe that removal of the EBAC is a dumbing down. Qualifications in the arts are rigorous subjects. She talked about it being a kind of a redress of that false hierarchy, which I think had unfortunately kind of crept in within schools, if you like. And I think we think that moves in terms of enrichment are also quite positive. She's encouraged, I think, that there is some commitment of funding there. But I think that we're cognizant that language of schools is often still the kind of statutory provision. And so being really clear about what is expected of schools in terms of that enrichment offer, I think will be really, really positive. So yeah, much to celebrate, we felt actually. And I think that the hope is that this will start to redress the balance. I think the other thing that I'm really aware of as well, though, is that, and this is something that Kate Chartwell was talking about, but the idea that we need the resource to match the ambition. Schools are not necessarily going to be in a position to immediately be able to resume GCSEs in technology where equipment needs replenishing, or, and those kinds of considerations and those kinds of training considerations in rehiring staff are quite massive as well. So, yeah, much to consider, but the hope would be that there will be some level of funding to kind of reinvigorate some of that provision as well.
Really helpful point, and reminds us again that capacity building piece isn't only for us to do, right? There's capacity building for government and others to do. Okay, that brings us to the sort of the end of that part of the conversation. What I want to do in just the few minutes that we've got left, and huge thanks to Susanna, I can see, who's put an amazing answer in about the question I posed about how do you galvanise people in the trust. I think that's something we're going to keep coming back to, colleagues, over the weeks and months ahead, and effectively that's what this work is about. What I want to do, though, in a moment, I'm going to ask each Will, Ellen and Michlyn just to give us, again, just a quick 30-second, what's your top message to people coming off this call? And I am going to insist it's about 30 seconds because I don't want to run over. In the meantime, though, colleagues, I want to come back to you on the call, audience members. I want to ask you that question I posed at the start, which is, what more do you need? So if you could start to pop some of that in the chat, we'll capture that, and obviously we'll think through what we can do to support you with this work. And in the meantime, Will, Michlyn and Ellen are going to give us their quick top answer. Now, Ellen, you're not muted. Does that mean you want to go first with your key message to everyone?
I don't mind going first. So I suppose be really intentional about it. Be really considered about it. We've got lots of kind of known unknowns and unknown unknowns going on at the moment. I didn't anticipate quoting, I think that's Donald Rumsfeld, isn't it, or something. But and I think just really contribute to the kind of voice and the consultation in the sector. Actually, I'm really looking forward to hearing what other trusts are doing, and we'd love to be able to share and to be able to hear from other people as well.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. Michlyn, over to you.
Yeah, so just return to what I mentioned earlier, do an audit of what you're already doing. Strengths, that I think that's the best place to start. But also, curriculum's a long game, so work slowly, work intentionally. You've still got time. Reach out to others in the sector for support, and be part of the conversation. So sign up to other things that are out there, to make sure that you're really informed.
Super. And finally to you, Will.
Yeah, Michlyn, you stole my phrase. I was going to say, start the conversation. Okay, what are the foundational skills in each key stage? What do they look like? Are some more foundational than others? Do we have the resources to support these? What staff development needs are there? And I would say, if you can get your staff talking like that, particularly in the areas of fluency and problem solving, you will be getting the staff in the right mindset for the changes that are going to come down the road.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of this conversation today. But as Michlyn will have just said, it's not the end of the conversation. We know this is something we're going to keep talking about. You've already started to populate the chat with advice and suggestions on how to manage this in the trust, but also some questions for us about actually what more we can do to support. We're going to take that away and we will come back to you. It's not going to be tomorrow because we don't want to give you that sense that this is work, remember, that you have to rush to do. So we're going to take a little bit of time to think about this. Ellen's also spoken to us and given us that little teaser of something else to look out for coming down the line, which is a little bit of strategic leadership work, thinking about how do we manage this across an organisation. So hopefully you're leaving the conversation today feeling a little bit wiser about English and maths. Also a little bit wiser, I hope, about how you just might break this down and think about it as the strategic sort of challenge that it is, without feeling the need to rush off and do loads of stuff. If we've done that, then mission accomplished. I want to just finish by saying a massive thanks to ARC, to Will, to Michlyn and to Ellen for your support today with this. It really is appreciated. And colleagues, let's keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.